Welcome back to 10th class Social Studies. As part of National Liberation Movement in Colonies, Chapter 15 of Social Studies syllabus, we already discussed how nationalism emerged and independence was achieved by the people from China and Vietnam. Today, we are moving to another module from the same chapter, and here we will discuss about national liberation movement that had happened in a colony in African continent, Nigeria. So when we discuss about the continent of Africa, last year in 9th class, we studied that Africa was considered as a dark continent, and it was called so not because the people from Africa were dark, but the Europeans were completely unaware about the things about African continent. That's why they described Africa as a dark continent. And later on, with the geographical discoveries, the African excavators, they landed in Africa and they learned and studied more about Africa, and they identified a lot of interesting facts about African people. And one of the major findings of the Europeans about African people that they were highly ethnic in nature, or they were tribal in culture. Okay, the African people were predominantly tribal people. Africans, they were living in forest areas, and in forest area they lived in groups. Each and every group acted as a separate entity. They have got their own rules, their own regulations, their own judicial systems and so on. And all their culture and traditions were entirely different from another groups. So automatically there were continuous clashes between these ethnic groups. And that was the general background of the African continent. So that you should keep in mind before we start learning about Nigerian nationalism. Okay, so the word nationalism, it was undoubtedly new for the Africans. They had no idea about nationalism. They had no idea about nation. So a group of people who were completely unaware about nations, for them nationalism is nothing but just a group of words. That was the idea of nationalism for the Africans. And above all, we have already said that African people were grouped on the basis of their tribal nature, tribal culture, tribal civilizations. And these colonial masters from the European country, they just brought certain areas and they grouped them together by force, not by any other sentiments. Just by using their physical force, the areas were brought together and they just named it by something. And the place what we are discussing, or the country what we are discussing, Nigeria, has been brought together. Certain areas were brought together by Britain, and the regions around river Niger, one of the most prominent river systems in African continent. So the areas around river Niger were brought together by the British government by using their physical force, and they called it by the name Nigeria. Okay, so the picture of Nigeria or the map of Nigeria from your textbook, it clearly sees or it clearly demarcates into three. Okay, or the northern part of Nigeria, it was predominantly inhabited by a tribal group called Hausa Fulani, and the Hausa Fulani people were mostly Islamic followers. And when it comes to the southern region, southern Nigeria, it was divided into two parts. Southeastern region, it was inhabited by a tribal group called the Igbo. And the southwestern part of Nigeria was inhabited by another tribal group called Yoruba. And the Igbo and Yoruba, they were following Christian religion, whereas Hausa Fulani, the northern Nigerian people, were following Islamic religion. And that itself shows how demarcated these two, the north and south. In south, as we know that they are close to coastal region and coastal region. So almost all the continents of that time, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, that a lot of missionaries from Europeans, the Christian missionaries, they came and they just started spreading their religion, the Christianity. And through this missionary work, the people got a little bit of education and culture and all. So automatically we can identify that Hausa Fulani people belongs to Islamic religion. They were not that much cultured when comparing to the people of the south, east and west. Okay, so we shall see that the story of modern Nigeria is nothing but the conflict of these tribal groups. The story or the history of modern Nigeria is nothing but the communal clashes, not the communal clashes, the tribal clashes between the north and western tribes. So this particular region, as I already said, that the British had brought certain areas around river Niger together, and it was called as Nigerian. It was one of the very populous area from African continent. And from 16th century onwards, Nigeria or the entire African continent provided a greater source of slaves. Slave trade was predominant in the African continent, and it continued up to around the 19th century. And by 19th century, the slave trade was legally ended. So no more chance of trading with slaves. So by the time Africa exposed to the outer world, and the Europeans identified that many products from Africa were in great demand, especially the palm oil and cocoa. So there started a greater awareness about the agricultural product, especially the cocoa and palm oil, and it has been started to be collected by the Europeans, and the Europeans started to sell these things in the international market. So by 1986, British established a colony in Nigeria, and a city, Lagos. It was developed as a center of administration, center of education, center of trade in Western African region. Lagos from Nigeria was developed by the British authorities or the British colonial masters as a center of administration, a center of agriculture, center of education, center of trade. So it became a prominent place, a prominent city in the West African region. So in 19th and 20th century, we can see that the emergence of racism, the racial discrimination, the colonial masters started discriminating the people on the basis of their race, especially on the basis of their color. The Africans were separated and the Europeans were separated. And the black Africans or the African people, the native African people, were excluded from getting prominent jobs in government. So it all created a kind of regional disparity or a racial disparity among the people of Europeans. And the masters created, the colonial masters, they clearly and cleverly created a rift, a kind of tensions between the people by promoting a particular group of people. Maybe the chief from one particular region, or the elites from one very special tribal groups. So this colonial policy, it just developed the southern regions. The policy of appeasing, policy of promoting, policy of protection, of all these colonial policy protected and developed the southern region, but not the north. And this colonial policy has created divisions among the people, and which resulted in the regional disparity between the north and the south. And by 1939, the colonial masters divided east and west, not only in the south, the southeast and southwest. We have already seen that southeast Igbo tribe and the southwest Yoruba tribe. So the Europeans, especially the British colonial masters, they divided the east and west on the basis of the tribal communities. So remember the divide and rule policy the British used in controlling India. So here started the educated intellectuals from the west, from the south, especially from the southwest. The educated intellectuals from the southwest promoted an idea of common Nigeria, maybe 1920s and 30s. So it is a time that in all around the world, in Asian and African continent, the people were aware about an idea of nationalism, freedom, liberty and all. So the tides of those ideas had reached into Nigeria. So the Nigerian elites, Nigerian intellectuals, they started thinking about having a common Nigeria. So in 1923, one of the prominent leaders from Nigeria, Herbert Macaulay, he established the first political party of Nigeria, Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP. Nigerian National Democratic Party. It was established by Herbert Macaulay in 1923, and from then onwards they participated in the elections. And the great thing about Herbert Macaulay and his political party from 1923, 28 and 33, in all these elections they participated and they won total seats in the legislative bodies. Even then they were never provided the self-rule. And in 1930s, by 1930s, Macaulay started supporting military attacks on the colonial masters. He decided that, or he identified that the legislative, only through the legislative process they will not get, or only through the legal process they will not get freedom. So he supported military attacks on the colonial masters in order to get freedom, the violent attacks. And in 1936, another political party comes up, Nigerian Youth Movement. Nnamdi Azikiwe was the leader of that movement. Nigerian Youth Movement was established by a very prominent Nigerian leader, Nnamdi Azikiwe. And he became very popular and very powerful in the political front of Nigeria. And by 1944, Herbert Macaulay, he identified that he cannot, or he alone cannot achieve independence for Nigeria. So, in order to get independence for Nigeria, he needed the support of young men and the youth movement. So, for that purpose, he organized a meeting with Nnamdi Azikiwe, and they decided to form a joint operation against the colonial masters. National Council of Nigeria and Cameroon, NCNC, was established by Herbert Macaulay and Nnamdi Azikiwe in the year 1944. And Azikiwe became the prominent leader, and he became the champion of Pan-African movements. He was able to create the first seeds of nationalism among the people of Africa, or among the people of Nigeria. And Nigerian nationalism became very popular in the post-war period, after the Second World War. And this particular feeling of nationalism was promoted by the soldiers who participated in the Second World War and the trade union leaders. So the soldiers provided that muscle power to the activities or the movement, and the trade union leaders might have provided that money power for the movements. And in 1945 we know that it is immediately after the Second World War, a national general strike was organized. It just proved how powerful the people of Nigeria, or how influential the people of Nigeria to arrest, or in order to stop all the activities initiated by the colonial masters. And this general strike was organized by the radical national leaders of Nigerian popularism or a Nigerian nationalism. So by 1940s, 1945, after the Second World War, the Nigerian national leaders, they identified that they are bestowed with the twin tasks, two duties to be fulfilled. And the first one, the foremost, fighting against the British, providing all the possible inputs in order to fight against the British. That was the first agenda or the first task of these national leaders. And the second one is more important and more difficult than the first, creating a unity or uniting political or tribal groups. Still, from 16th century to 20th century, that tribal clashes were carrying on. What is going on? So the national leaders, they wanted to fight against the British, and along with the fight against the British, these national leaders wanted to create a feeling of oneness among different tribal groups. That was the most important and most difficult task. Anyway, all these national leaders, Herbert Macaulay and Madi Azikiwe, and all these national leaders, they tried their level best in order to create a feeling of oneness among the people. And this nationalism was strong in South. We know that the southern people who were exposed to Christian missionaries, Christian missionaries will work in the field of education. So these people from the southern region, means the Igbo tribe and Yoruba tribe, they were exposed to education, and through education they get to know about the ideas of nationalism, liberty, equality and all. So among them, nationalism became popular. And their idea of nationalism was entirely different from the idea of nationalism from House of Fulani. And it has created a rift in between Yoruba tribe and Igbo tribe. And Yoruba and Igbo were fighting, and at the same time they were fighting against House of Fulani. So all these three major tribal groups were in fight. And in short, by 1950, all these three major regions of Nigeria had their own national movements or anti-colonial groups. You see, in 1923, the first political party, a common political party, Nigerian National Democratic Party, was established. And 1936, Nigerian Youth Movement was established. And in 1944, these two political parties came together to form the National Council of Nigeria and Cameroon, NCNC. So that was the history of Nigerian nationalism. But when it comes to 1950, the three regions, the north, southeast and southwest, all the three regions, they had their own national liberation movements or anti-colonial groups. In the north, we can have that the Nigerian People's Congress, NPC. And for the east, but the southeastern region, National Council for Nigeria and Cameroon, NCNC. NCNC, you should remember that it is the union of these two political parties which established in 1923 and in 1936. And that the single largest political party of Nigeria became powerful and influential only in the southeastern region by 1950. And for the southwest, they had an action group against the colonial masters. That was the story. In the beginning we said, the story of modern Nigeria is the conflict of tribal groups. And that statement, it became true by 1950. All the three tribal areas had their own national liberation movements. That Nigerian People's Congress, NPC, for the North Nigerians, and National Council for Nigeria and Cameroon, NCNC, for the Southeast, and Action Group for the Southwest. And about the independence and democracy, the nature of democracy, and we will discuss in the next module. Okay, thank you.